He bought her on a dare, laughing. She stood silent with two scared children clinging to her coat. But one whisper from her lips silenced every man on that porch and changed his life forever. The auction yard was full of dust and cruel laughter, the kind men share when there's whiskey on their breath and nothing left in their hearts but win. Ezra Langley wasn't drunk, not yet, but the dare had circled the saloon like wildfire all week. They said he wouldn't do it, that the richest rancher in Salt Creek, a man with gold buckles and silver-spurred boots, wouldn't dirty his name bringing home a barefoot woman with two children and mountain dirt still in her hair. They were wrong. Ezra stepped forward through the jeers, his coat swinging open like a flag of war. He didn't blink when he handed over the coins. 35 for the woman, 5 for the kids. A joke, they called it. A laugh for the boys. A story to tell come winter when the snow locked everyone inside with their regrets. The woman didn't flinch when the coins changed hands. She stood straight, spine stiff under the thin dress, her face unreadable. One child, a girl no older than 9, clutched her side with wide eyes half hidden by unbrushed curls. The other, a boy maybe 5, gripped her skirt like he was still waiting to wake from a bad dream. Ezra turned on his heel and didn't look back. "Let's go," he said. She followed. They didn't speak on the ride to Langley Ranch. The wagon wheels creaked and the horses snorted at the dust, but the woman said nothing. Ezra didn't press her. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Maybe tears, maybe gratitude, maybe some spark of defiance. But what he got was silence. Not the kind that begged for mercy, the kind that had buried its dead a long time ago and knew there was no point in speaking to ghosts. The children sat close to their mother, eyes flicking from the trees to the sky to Ezra's boots. He noticed the way the girl tucked her brother into her side, protective beyond her years. No whining, no begging, just silent watching. By the time they pulled into the yard, the sun was falling behind the barn, spilling gold over the fields. Hands had gathered on the porch. Word had traveled fast. They watched from under brims and behind rolled sleeves, waiting to see the spectacle unfold. Ezra stepped down first. He didn't offer a hand. The woman didn't wait for one. She lifted both children down, one on each hip, set them gently on the dirt, then turned to face the crowd. Not a word from her mouth, not a blink. One of the ranch hands muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the porch to hear. "She's got the look of a crow, sharp, wild, and ready to peck." Ezra didn't flinch, but the woman did. Not with her hands, with her voice. She leaned in close to Ezra, so only he could hear, and whispered 4 words, soft, barely more than breath. His shoulders locked. His boots felt rooted in the dirt. The laughter died in his throat. For one long second, he said nothing. Then he turned to the porch, his voice cutting through the gathering dusk like a blade. "Y'all best find something to do." The men scattered like roaches under sudden light. Ezra didn't explain. He didn't have to. The look on his face said enough. The joke was over, and something colder had taken its place. He gestured toward the house. "Come on." She nodded once. The girl took her mother's hand. The boy stayed close behind. Together they walked up the steps, past the boots and the spittoon and the judgment, and into the warmth of Ezra Langley's house. Inside, the fire was low and the windows were open. Ezra hadn't cleaned. He hadn't expected company. But the woman didn't wrinkle her nose or ask where to put her things. She looked around once, then motioned for the children to sit by the hearth. "What's your name?" Ezra asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She hesitated only a moment. "June." He waited. Nothing more came. "And theirs." "Clara and Boone." He nodded, then poured 3 cups of water from the pitcher by the stove and handed them to the children. They drank like they'd just walked a desert. June took the 4th cup in silence. Ezra sat at the table, one arm resting across the back of the chair. He studied her. The dirt under her nails, the cuts on her palms, the way she always placed herself between the children and the door. "You were up in the broken spine range," he stated, not a question. She nodded. "Long walk." No answer. "Why'd you come down this time?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something flicker in them. Not fear. Something harder. "Snow's coming," she said simply. Ezra didn't press. Not yet. Later, the children fell asleep, curled near the fire. June hadn't eaten, but hadn't asked for food either. She stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the horizon as if waiting for something worse than wolves or storms. "Why'd you say that?" Ezra asked finally. She turned. "Back there," he added. "The 4 words you whispered to me." June didn't smile, didn't soften, but her voice was steady. "Because I needed you to listen, not to laugh." Ezra exhaled. It wasn't shame he felt. It was something deeper, older, like the weight of a story just beginning, and the ugly feeling it might hurt before it healed. "You stopped it cold," he admitted. She looked back out the window. "I don't care what they think," she said. "But my children, they've heard too much laughter at their expense." Ezra leaned forward, resting both elbows on the table. "What happened to their father?" June's fingers tightened on the windowsill, her jaw clenched. "Fire," she said. Then after a long, heavy beat, she added, "That's what they told me." The words hung in the air. They told me. Ezra felt his gut twist. He didn't ask more. That night, he gave up his bed and took the cot in the barn. Not because he was afraid. Ezra Langley wasn't afraid of anything, but because something in June's silence deserved space. The children didn't cry. June didn't make a sound. But Ezra lay awake long after the moon rose, staring at the wooden beams above his head, hearing her whisper again and again in his mind. "Wade Carroll is coming." He didn't know the name, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled his bones, that he would soon. By morning, word had spread. The Langley Ranch had a new resident. 2 kids, a mountain woman, wild as a hawk, quiet as snowfall. The town talked. The ranch hands muttered. Ezra said nothing. But by noon, something strange had happened. Boone was following one of the stable hands, watching wide-eyed as the man brushed down a mare. Clara was helping the cook peel potatoes, sleeves rolled up like she'd been born to it. And June. June was sitting on the porch mending one of Ezra's old shirts with neat, practiced hands, as if she'd lived there 100 years. Ezra stood on the rise above the barn, arms crossed, hat tipped low, watching. He didn't understand it yet, but he felt it. Something had shifted. The joke he'd started had taken on a life of its own, and it wasn't funny anymore. It was quiet. It was steady. It was almost peaceful. And then came the rider, a lone figure cutting through the dust like a knife. Ezra spotted him first, lean in the saddle, riding fast, coated in trail dust. He didn't wait to be announced. He rode straight into the yard, pulled the reins hard enough to make the horse rear, and shouted, "Ezra Langley, you got something that don't belong to you." June was already on her feet, the mending forgotten in her lap. Ezra stepped forward from the rise, his jaw set. "Who's asking?" The man dismounted with fire in his eyes, a cruel twist to his lips, a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "The name's Wade Carroll." Ezra's blood went cold. The name, the whisper, it was real. "I'm her brother," Wade snarled. Ezra's hand twitched toward his belt, but June's voice cut the air, sharp and clear. "No, you're not." The man froze. So did Ezra. Clara stood up from the porch steps, her small hands balled into fists. Boone whimpered and hid behind his mother's skirt. Wade's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Don't lie to him now, June. You told me I'd never see you again unless—" "I meant it," she said, her voice like ice. "And you shouldn't have come." Ezra stepped between them, placing himself squarely in Wade's path. The man's hand went to his coat pocket. Ezra's eyes narrowed. "Careful," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're on Langley land." Wade grinned, a flash of broken teeth. "Then I reckon I'll burn it down too," Clara screamed. Boone cried out. "Ezra, move first." But June didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She whispered something again. Not to Ezra, not to Wade. She whispered to her children, and whatever it was, it broke them both into motion. The yard erupted before a gun could be drawn. Boone screamed and clung to Clara as June moved like lightning, throwing herself between Wade and her children. Ezra's boots hit the dirt, his coat flying as he lunged, closing the gap in 3 long strides. Whatever June had whispered, whatever command had passed from mother to child in that impossible second, it had worked. Clara turned, shielding her brother, and bolted toward the house. The children vanished through the door just as Ezra collided with Wade Carroll. They hit the ground hard, a cloud of dust rising around them like a shroud. Ezra's forearm jammed against Wade's throat, pinning him down. Wade writhed, spitting gravel and curses, but Ezra didn't loosen his hold. "Tell me how you know her," Ezra growled, the name from the whisper now tasting like poison in his mouth. Wade coughed, eyes wild, hands scrabbling at the dirt. "She's blood." "Half anyhow. Don't matter. Family's family." Ezra shoved his knee deeper into Wade's ribs. "You threaten to burn my place down again, and you'll be choking on more than dust." "I came for what's mine," Wade spat, flecks of blood on his lips. "She doesn't belong to you," Ezra snapped, tightening his grip. Wade let out a strangled laugh, wheezing under the pressure. "You think she's yours? Bought her like a cow? You don't know her, Langley. You don't know what you're letting in." He twisted his head. "Ask her about Thomas. Ask her what really happened in that fire." Ezra didn't answer, not with words. He stood slowly, grinding his boot into Wade's ribs one last time before stepping back. Wade rolled onto his side, coughing, his hat crushed beside him. June hadn't moved. She stood tall, lips pressed together, eyes cold and steady. Ezra looked at her, waiting for her to speak, to explain. Instead, she reached down, picked up the hem of her skirt, and turned toward the house. "Keep him off your land," she said quietly over her shoulder. "He won't stop if he thinks you're weak." Ezra didn't move until the door closed behind her. Then he turned back to Wade. "You got 5 minutes," he said. "After that, I start counting bullets." Wade scrambled to his feet, eyes blazing with hate. "You'll regret this, Langley." Ezra crossed his arms. "Doubt it." Wade mounted his horse with a snarl and galloped off, spitting dust behind him. Ezra watched until the shape vanished over the ridge, then let out a long breath and headed for the house. As he reached the porch, his boot hit something small and hard in the dirt. He bent down. It was a metal token, tarnished and grimy, fallen from Wade's pocket during the struggle. On it was a crude brand, a faded R stitched in red thread, circled by a horseshoe. He didn't recognize it, but he pocketed it anyway. A bad feeling crawled up his spine. Inside, the air was tight with silence. June stood in the middle of the room, one hand on Clara's shoulder, the other gently patting Boone's back. The boy's sobs had quieted, but he still clung to her like a shadow afraid of the light. Ezra wiped his boots and stepped inside. "You want to tell me what that was?" June didn't flinch. "Trouble?" "I figured that part," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "He mentioned a man named Thomas." She hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from Clara's face. "My husband." "Wade's your husband's cousin," Ezra guessed. She nodded. "Took over the property after the fire. Said we owed him for the debt Thomas left behind." Ezra frowned. "So he came to collect." "He came to own," she said, her voice dropping. "He said the mountain wasn't safe for a woman alone. Offered to take us in. Said he'd raise the children, if I agreed to be his." Ezra's gut tightened. "And when you said no?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "He locked us in the root cellar for 3 days. Said hunger had a way of breaking a person." Ezra's jaw clenched so hard he felt it in his teeth. "And did it?" June looked him dead in the eye. "No." He didn't say anything for a moment. The fire crackled. Boone sniffled. Clara watched him like a hawk, her small fist still balled at her side. "You're not going back to him," Ezra said finally. "I know," June answered. Ezra stepped forward and knelt beside Boone. "You all right, son?" The boy nodded, though his lip trembled. "Mama said to run, so we did." "You did right," Ezra said. "And I won't let anyone hurt you. Not here." Boone blinked up at him, the start of trust flickering behind tired eyes. That evening, the ranch was quiet. Word had spread fast again, this time without laughter. Nobody dared mention the mountain woman now, not after Wade Carroll had ridden off, wheezing and bruised. June didn't come down for supper. She stayed upstairs, brushing Clara's hair and singing something low under her breath, while Boone curled up under a quilt. Ezra left a tray at the door and didn't knock. The next morning, she was already in the yard when he rose, sleeves rolled up, hauling water from the pump. "You don't have to," he started. "I do," she said. So he let her. Days passed. The weather cooled. the leaves turned brittle, and something began to shift. June mended shirts, fed the hens, taught Boone how to patch boots, and Clara how to ride bareback. She worked without complaint, without pause, as if trying to build a wall of normalcy around her children, brick by boring brick. Ezra came in from the fields one evening to find Clara asleep in the barn loft. Boone curled on the hay beside a kitten, and June seated on the ground, carving a wooden bird with his old knife. "You've done this before," he said. June glanced up. "Carving or starting over?" "Both." She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Ezra sat beside her and watched the blade move. Slow, sure, quiet. The bird took shape in her hands like something remembered, not learned. "I was raised in a cabin not much bigger than your tack room," she said after a while. "Daddy taught me to carve. Mama taught me to sew. When I married Thomas, I thought that'd be enough." Ezra didn't speak. "It wasn't," she finished, voice flat. He looked at her hands, so steady. He wondered how many things they'd built just to be taken apart again. "You said Wade won't stop," Ezra said quietly. June nodded. "He wants what he thinks is owed. The land, the children, me." Ezra watched the horizon. "He rides in again. I'll put him in the ground." June didn't flinch. "You're not a killer." Ezra met her eyes. "No, but I don't let people take what isn't theirs." She looked away then, and for the first time her voice cracked. "They always take." Ezra didn't know what to say, so he reached out gently and took the finished bird from her hands. "I ain't taking this," he said, "just borrowing it." A faint smile ghosted her lips. That night, June came down to supper. She sat at the table with Ezra, Clara, and Boone, and the children laughed for the first time. Clara told a story about a stubborn mule, and Boone smeared honey on everything. June listened, smiling, her eyes soft. Ezra felt something bloom in the quiet. Not romance, not yet, but warmth, the kind that crawled up from the belly and reminded a man he was still human. Then the telegram came. Ezra found it nailed to the post by the barn. No sender, just a message scratched in tight black ink. "They're coming. 2 weeks." He took it to June without a word. She read it once, then again. "Wade has people," she said. "Friends who will ride for a share. He's not smart, but he's cruel." Ezra nodded. "We'll be ready." "I don't want the children to see more violence," she whispered. Ezra's face darkened. "Then we keep it away from them." They made plans quietly, carefully. Ezra called in a few old hands he trusted, men who owed him, men who wouldn't talk. June showed them the paths through the forest behind the property, the ridge line that gave a clear view of the South Trail. She knew the land like it was carved into her palms. Clara and Boone stayed close to the house. They weren't told, but they weren't stupid. Boone clung to June's skirts again. Clara didn't sleep well. One night, June sat on the porch alone. Ezra stepped out, 2 tin cups in hand. "You don't have to stay," he said. She looked at him. "Where would I go?" Ezra took a long breath. "After this, after it's over, you're free to leave." She didn't answer right away. "I know," she said finally, "but I might not want to." Ezra's heart caught in his chest. Before he could respond, a sound broke through the trees. Hooves. Close. Too close. Ezra stood. June's face went white. Then came the knock. Not at the door. On the window. Low, sharp, intentional. Ezra reached for the rifle behind the door. But when he opened it, there was no one there. Just a note pinned to the frame with a gleaming knife. "This time we don't leave empty-handed." Ezra yanked the note from the frame with a snap of his wrist. The blade, still lodged through the paper, trembled from the impact. June didn't speak, but her hand went to the base of her throat as if something had cinched there. The night wind cut sharper now, slicing through the porch like it carried the breath of men hiding just beyond the trees. Boone and Clara were already awake. Ezra saw the flicker of movement inside. 2 small figures peeking around the corner of the stair rail, watching with wide, silent eyes. He stepped inside, shut the door behind him, and held the knife low at his side. June moved quickly to the children, kneeling before them. "You're safe," she whispered, pulling them close. "You hear me? You're safe as long as we stay smart." Boone nodded, but Clara asked, "Is it that man again?" June didn't answer directly, but her hands tightened around them. Ezra knelt beside them, placing the blade on the table with a heavy clunk. "We're going to do things a little different starting now," he said. "Boone, Clara, I want you two to listen to your mama like your life depends on it, because it just might." Clara met his eyes and nodded solemnly. Boone didn't speak but clung tighter to his mother. Ezra turned to June. "Pack what you can, whatever's light. We're moving them." "Tonight?" she asked. He nodded. "There's an old line shack north of here, about 2 miles into the ridge. Hidden, tight, and no direct trail leading to it. They won't find it if we don't lead them there." "You want me to take the children and hide?" Ezra didn't like the sound of it. It sounded like retreat, like sending them off alone while he stayed and waited for the wolves. But he nodded anyway. "You'll be safer." She stood. "Not forever." "No," he admitted, "but long enough for me to deal with what's coming." They didn't waste time. Ezra filled 2 satchels with dried food, a flint kit, an oil lantern, spare blankets. June packed Clara's comb, Boone's carved bird, and 2 of Ezra's old shirts stitched tighter at the waist. It wasn't much, but it was what could be carried. He led them through the pasture by lantern light, June gripping Boone's hand, Clara walking beside Ezra, silent, holding the hem of his coat in one small hand. Halfway up the slope, she asked, "Do you think they'll kill you?" Ezra didn't stop walking. "I think they'll try." She nodded like she'd already expected that answer. "Mama won't run." Ezra looked back at June. Her silhouette against the dim moonlight was a pillar of resolve. "No," he said. "She won't." The shack was small and smelled of old wood smoke. Ezra cleared the space, lit the stove, and stacked kindling. June spread the blankets. When she finally turned to him, the firelight danced off her cheekbones. "I don't like this," she said. "I know. If they come with 5 men, then I have 5 bullets," he said, managing the hint of a smile. She didn't return it. Instead, she walked forward and placed her hand on his chest. "I meant what I said. I might not want to leave." Ezra placed his hand over hers. "Then stay alive long enough to decide." He left without another word. Back at the ranch, he waited. He didn't sleep. He positioned lanterns behind windows to make it seem like someone still moved inside. He stacked barrels by the east fence and lined the porch with nails upturned like teeth. He sat on the roof of the bunkhouse with a repeater rifle across his lap, the metal token from Wade's pocket feeling heavy and cold against his palm. At dawn they came. Not a charge, not a siege. Just quiet riders, 4 of them, emerging from the trees like fog on a lake. Wade Carroll led the way, wearing a long black duster. He looked up toward the house like a man already counting what would be his. "I see you got my message," he called out. Ezra spoke from the roof. "Didn't think you could write." Wade chuckled. "She ain't worth dying for, Langley. You know that, right?" Ezra chambered around. The sound was loud in the morning stillness. Wade stepped back, lifting his hands. "All right, but I brought company." 2 of the other riders pulled rifles from their saddles. Ezra fired once. Not at a man, but at the dirt inches from Wade's boots. "Next one ain't a warning." Wade's eyes narrowed. "Where is she?" "Gone," Ezra said. "And you're not going to find her." Wade's face twisted. "She stole from me." "That land was never yours," Ezra snapped. "You didn't earn it. You burned it. Left a woman and 2 kids in a root cellar while you drank the deed money." "You don't know what you're talking about," Wade snarled. "I know cowards," Ezra said. "I know what they look like when they try to play kings." One of Wade's men muttered something, and Wade gestured sharply. "We'll be back," he said. "You can't sit on that roof forever." "You come back," Ezra said, not lowering the rifle. "You better dig your own graves first." They rode off slower this time. Quiet, but not gone. Not for good. Ezra waited until their shapes disappeared over the ridge, then climbed down, muscles tight from hours of stillness. He couldn't breathe, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of what hadn't happened yet. He made his way back to the shack before nightfall, taking the long route through the woods. June was at the stove when he arrived, boiling coffee. "They're planning something," Ezra said. June nodded. "They always do." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a pistol, old but well kept. Thomas's, she said. He was a lot of things, but he taught me how to shoot. Ezra took it, examined it, and handed it back. Then you should keep it. That night, after the children were asleep, Ezra pulled the metal token from his pocket and held it out to her. This fell out of Wade's pocket. June took it. Her face went pale in the lantern light. The Riddle Creek outfit, she whispered. Ezra's gut tightened. You know them. Thomas owed them. More than he owed Wade. They're not just ranchers, Ezra. They're collectors. They take land. They take lives. They don't stop. She looked up at him, her eyes dark with a fear he hadn't seen before. This isn't just Wade's fight anymore. It never was. He stepped outside into the cold. The wind had shifted again, and this time it smelled like fire. The smell wasn't imagined. It was faint at first, like the ghost of a campfire miles away. But Ezra had lived too many years with the wind as his only warning to ignore it now. By dawn, the scent had thickened into a low, oily burn that curled through the valley like a snake. Ezra stood just beyond the tree line, the shack hidden behind him, and stared toward the southern ridge where a thin column of smoke now rose against the pale sky. He didn't rush back to warn June. He knew she already smelled it. Instead, he crouched by a fallen log and watched the horizon, rifle across his knees, breath still as the earth beneath him. He watched the way the smoke twisted. It was controlled, not wild. Someone was burning brush to flush out cover, not a campfire. A warning. He didn't move for nearly an hour. Then he rose and headed back to the shack, boots silent across the needles and dry grass. Inside, June was ready. Her shawl was already tied at her shoulders. Clara stood beside her, her boots laced tight, a small, skinning knife tucked into the waist of her skirt like she meant to use it. Boone sat cross-legged by the wall, stuffing jerky into his satchel with shaking hands. They're close, Ezra said. June nodded. How many? Couldn't see, but more than 4. Maybe 6, maybe 10. Wade's calling in every favor he's got. June crouched to Boone's level. You remember what we talked about? Boone nodded, wide-eyed. Hide. Don't cry. Only if we say. Clara stepped forward, chin up. What if they come in the night? Ezra met her eyes. They won't make it that far. June looked at him. We need to move again. This shack won't hold. Ezra hesitated. There's one more place. Safer? Not safer, just older. The East Ridge has a cave. Dry, hidden high ground. Hard to reach, but that's the point. June nodded once. Show us. They packed in silence. Boone carried the satchel. Clara slung the blankets. June took the rifle Ezra had left for her and slipped Thomas's pistol into her belt. Ezra led them northeast through the densest part of the woods, where elk used to roam and mountain lions sometimes screamed after dark. The cave wasn't visible until you were nearly standing in its mouth, a narrow crack in the stone wall of the ridge, shielded by a curtain of ivy and brush. Ezra pushed it aside, revealing a hollow just wide enough to stand, just deep enough to shelter. This was your secret place, June asked quietly. Ezra nodded. Came here when I was 17, built a fire, cried into the dirt. Thought I was a man, but I was just mad. She didn't laugh, just looked at the walls like they might remember his voice. They settled in again. Ezra stood watch outside until dusk. Then they came. No gallop, no shouting, just hooves in silence and the slow crunch of boots through underbrush. Ezra counted 5 shapes from the ridge, then 7, then 9. He crouched lower. They moved like men who weren't afraid to kill. Faces shadowed, guns ready. One of them carried a rope. Another had a dog, muzzled but sniffing hard. Ezra's stomach twisted. They were circling. He crawled back into the cave. They've brought dog, he whispered. June stiffened. Then we don't wait. Ezra met her eyes. You're thinking what I'm thinking. She nodded. Split up. He hated it before the words left her mouth, but it was the only way. You take Boone, she said. I'll keep Clara with me. Ezra didn't argue. He crouched to Boone's level. We're going to play a game, a quiet game. You and me, we're going to sneak through the woods like ghosts. Can you do that? Boone's eyes were huge, but he nodded. Like ghosts. June knelt to her son and kissed his forehead. Don't let go of his hand. June kissed Clara too, then whispered something only the girl could hear. Clara nodded once, her face a mask of grim determination. They split just before dark. Ezra moved west with Boone, circling around the ridge, keeping to the shadows. Every few yards he paused, ears straining. Boone didn't make a sound, not even when the dog howled once in the distance. Behind them, 2 gunshots echoed. Ezra froze. Boone looked up at him, mouth trembling. Ezra didn't say a word, just squeezed the boy's hand and kept moving, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to trust her. He had to believe she was as strong as she seemed. They reached the Langley barn by midnight. The ranch was dark. No lanterns, no horses. Ezra led Boone through the back door and into the hayloft, where he wrapped him in wool and laid a shotgun beside the boy's bed of hay. I'll be back, he whispered. You stay here. Don't come out unless it's me. Boone's lip trembled. Will they hurt, Mama? Ezra looked him in the eye. Not if I get to them first. Then he was gone. He moved through the trees like a ghost himself. Every branch a trigger, every shadow a question. He reached the ridge again by dawn. Smoke rose from the west side. Now real fire. Someone had lit the old trail marker on purpose. A signal. Ezra crept forward, belly to the ground. And he saw her. June stood in the clearing, her arms raised, Clara behind her. Both surrounded. 5 men. Wade among them. The dog barked once, pacing. One man held a rope. Thought you could outrun me? Wade sneered. You think one rancher's worth all this blood? I think you're not worth the dust on my boots, June said, her voice ringing clear. Wade's hand lashed out and struck her across the face. Ezra moved. He didn't think. Didn't breathe. The first shot tore through the arm of the man with the rope. He screamed and dropped it. The second hit the muzzle of the shotgun another man carried, knocking it sideways. Ezra charged into the clearing, rifle raised. Drop him! He bellowed. Wade turned, stunned. Ezra's fist landed clean on his jaw, sending him sprawling. Clara, in a flash of motion, grabbed the knife from June's belt and slashed the dog's leash, sending the animal howling into the trees. June turned on one of the others, pistol drawn. Run! Ezra shouted again. June grabbed Clara's hand and bolted through the brush, gunfire sparking behind her. Ezra dove left, taking cover behind a fallen log, returning fire with deadly aim. 2 men went down. The rest scattered. Wade tried to crawl away. Ezra followed. You come to my home, he growled, pressing the rifle to Wade's spine. You threaten my family, my land. Wade whimpered, blood on his teeth. She ain't yours. Ezra knelt beside him, his voice a low whisper that was more dangerous than any shout. She is now. He didn't pull the trigger. He didn't have to. He just looked at the terror in Wade's eyes and knew the fight was over. But he was wrong. This was only the beginning. The morning light bled across the clearing, slanting through the pines in golden shafts, catching the rising steam of warm blood cooling on the ground. Wade Carroll lay flat, one arm pinned beneath him, mouth full of dirt and the taste of defeat. Ezra didn't take his eyes off him, not even when the last echoes of gunfire faded into the hills. He could still hear June and Clara crashing through the brush ahead, fleeing toward safety. But this moment belonged to something else, something old and bitter and necessary. Ezra planted his boot on Wade's back, pressing just enough to remind the man he was still alive, only because mercy hadn't left Ezra's bones yet. Any more with you? Ezra asked, his voice low and cold. Wade coughed. They ran. They coming back? Wade spat blood. You think they follow me for loyalty? They came for the promise of a share, not for me. Ezra leaned in. Then you're alone now. Wade laughed weakly. Story of my life. Ezra removed his foot and stepped back, rifle still trained on the man's shoulder. Stand up, slow. Wade rolled, flinching, then rose to his knees, hands raised. His lip was split, one eye already swelling shut, but the hatred remained, even broken. He looked at Ezra like a man trying to etch curses into the wind. You don't even know her, Wade hissed. You think she's some frontier saint? You don't know what she's done. Ezra's finger tightened on the trigger. I don't care what she's done. I care what you tried to do. Wade smirked. You're no better than me. You bought her, just did it with cleaner boots. Ezra took a slow breath, letting the rage settle low in his gut like coals banked for later. She came here carrying more courage in her silence than you'll ever have with a rifle in your hand. Wade's smile faltered. Ezra took a step closer. Now I'm going to say this once. You don't ride into Salt Creek again. You don't send letters. You don't so much as think her name. Because if I even suspect you're looking in her direction, I won't give you another warning. I'll bury you so deep the worms will get lost. Wade swallowed. Then Ezra raised his rifle, pointing it toward the woods. Go! Wade hesitated, looked back once, but Ezra was already lowering the sight. Not out of weakness, just out of certainty. A man like Wade, humiliated, bleeding, abandoned by his own pack, he'd either die alone or disappear into whatever shadows still had use for him. Ezra didn't care which. By the time he reached the edge of the trees, June and Clara had already circled back, meeting him at the bend near the dry creek. Clara ran first, arms flung around his waist. Ezra staggered slightly from the force of it, but caught her up in one arm, holding tight. I'm all right, he said. June walked slower, one hand still gripping the pistol, the other on her daughter's shoulder as they reunited. Her face bore the red print of Wade's backhand, but she didn't mention it. Her eyes went to Ezra's, a question she hadn't yet dared ask. He answered anyway. He's gone. June nodded. Clara didn't speak again until they reached the barn where Boone still slept, curled in the hay, one fist wrapped around the barrel of the shotgun. June crouched by him, stroking his cheek until he blinked up at her. Ezra watched from the doorway, the rifle resting against his shoulder. The barn smelled of old hay and safety. June looked up. How long do you think we've bought? Ezra ran a hand down his face. Long enough. For what? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the edge of the barn and stared out at the fields, now lit in the full gold of morning. Horses grazed far off. Smoke rose steady from the chimney. A quiet day waited. For something better, he said. They didn't return to the line shack. They didn't go back to hiding. Ezra brought them fully into the house that very night, not as guests, not as burdens, but as something beginning to feel like family. The town didn't take long to notice. June walked with Clara to the general store 3 days later, Boone riding in the back of the wagon with Ezra and a sack of feed. No one dared say a word. They stared, yes, whispered behind crates and over barrels of grain, but June held her chin high, her eyes soft but unbending. Inside the store, Clara picked out sewing thread, and Boone asked the shopkeeper if kittens were allowed in the yard. June paid in coins Ezra had handed her before they left. When she returned to the wagon, she didn't explain how her hands trembled until they steadied on the reins. Ezra noticed, though. He said nothing, just sat beside her on the ride home, their shoulders almost touching, the rhythm of the horses settling the silence between them. That evening, June cooked. Beans and salt pork, bread thick and cracked from the fire oven. Ezra swore it was the best thing he'd tasted in 5 years. The children sat at the table like they belonged there, laughing at Boone's impression of the grumpy milk cow. A week later, he stepped onto the porch to smoke his pipe, only to find June already there, seated in the rocking chair, her hair loose for the first time. The stars hung thick overhead. You all right? He asked. She nodded. Just thinking about how strange it is to feel safe. Ezra leaned against the railing, watching her face in the moonlight. She looked softer now, still strong, but not braced for war. You're not used to it, he said. She shook her head. Not really. Even when things were good, they weren't steady. It'll take time. I don't know if time is enough, she admitted. Sometimes I feel like I'm still in that cellar, still listening for footsteps, still trying to keep Boone from crying too loud so the monsters don't come back. Ezra looked at her, then really looked. June, he said, they're not coming back. Not ever. She turned her head, met his eyes. I believe you. He finally sat, the porch groaning under the weight of unspoken things. I meant what I said back then, he murmured. Which part? That now, I care more than I should. She didn't respond with words, but she reached over and placed her hand on top of his, where it rested on the armrest. He didn't move it away. Later that night, when the children were asleep, Ezra passed by the living room on his way to the barn and stopped at the door. June sat by the hearth with Clara, mending a tear in her dress. "You need anything?" he asked. June looked up. "No." Clara smiled. "We're all right." Ezra nodded once and stepped outside. He didn't see the man watching from the trees, didn't see the glint of metal, didn't hear the whisper of movement. But June did. A breath, a scrape of boot on stone. Her head snapped up. Her voice cut through the night like a shot. "Ezra!" He turned just in time to see a shape rising from the dark, a knife drawn high. June didn't wait. She fired once through the open door, Thomas's pistol cracking like thunder. The man dropped. Ezra froze. June ran forward, Clara right behind her. Ezra knelt beside the body. It wasn't Wade. It was someone else, younger, leaner, dressed like a drifter. But in his coat pocket was a piece of cloth, embroidered with a familiar mark. The faded R circled by a horseshoe, the sigil of the Riddle Creek outfit. Ezra looked up slowly, the false sense of peace shattering into a million pieces. "He's not done," he said. June stood over the dead man, the smoking pistol still in her hand. "But neither are we." The body lay still in the dirt, blood soaking into the earth just beyond the porch steps. Ezra knelt beside him long after the echo of June's shot had faded, his palm resting lightly on the dead man's shoulder, as if waiting for a breath that wouldn't come. Boone and Clara had been ushered back inside by June, both wide-eyed but silent, their small fingers wrapped around one another like rope. Ezra turned the man over slowly, careful not to smear the pocket where the cloth sigil sat folded. A faded R stitched in red thread, circled by a crude horseshoe. The brand of the Riddle Creek outfit, 3 Valleys West. Wade's uncle had once run cattle with them, but the place was nothing more than a shell now. All debts and rust and angry men with too much time. June stepped down beside him. "I know that mark," she said, her voice low. Ezra looked up. "How?" "My husband, Thomas. He owed them. They came knocking even after the fire." She knelt across from him, her eyes focused on the blood spreading beneath the man's shoulder. "Said I had until winter to repay what Thomas borrowed, or they'd come collect what was left." Ezra stared at the sigil. "Then this wasn't just Wade." "No," her voice was steady. "This is bigger." He stood, brushing his palms on his trousers. "We burned the body." June nodded once. "Tonight." They dug the pit at the edge of the woods, far enough from the house that Boone wouldn't see the smoke, but close enough that Ezra could stand with his rifle as it burned. The flames caught slow, curling first through the dry pine branches, then licking along the man's coat. June didn't flinch as the stench thickened. Ezra stayed beside her the whole time, his hand near hers but not touching. Not yet. Back inside, Clara watched the window without blinking. Boone had fallen asleep with his head on her lap, one small fist still balled near his chest. June sat at the edge of the bed after the fire burned low. Ezra stood by the window. "This won't stop," she said. "No," he replied. "Not until they think we're too much trouble." "And what will make them think that?" Ezra turned, his face lit by the dying embers. "A message." "What kind?" She looked up. "The kind they don't ignore." The next morning, Ezra saddled his black mare, a horse built more for mountains than speed. He packed the saddlebag with a single letter wrapped in oilskin, the burned cloth sigil from the dead man's pocket stitched to its cover. He rode out before the sun fully rose, mist still blanketing the lands, and left the package at the gates of the Riddle Creek outfit. He didn't knock, didn't wait, just tied it to their gatepost with a piece of bloodied rope and rode back home. He said nothing when he returned, but June knew. The following days passed like kindling too dry to trust. Everything seemed to crackle. Every noise was suspect. Boone began sleeping under the bed again, clutching the wooden bird Ezra had returned to him. Clara stopped speaking for 2 full days, her voice stored somewhere behind her lips where only she could find it. June never sat with her back to a window. Ezra watched it all. He fixed the gate, oiled the rifles, showed Clara how to reload with calm fingers, taught Boone to whistle, sharp and piercing, in the event of danger. He worked the fields harder than usual, not for the harvest, but to stay ready. And then, 3 days later, a letter came, left in a burlap sack on the front porch, pinned beneath a stone. Ezra opened it in the barn, alone. June watched him from the door and said nothing until he folded the paper and tucked it into the flame of the lantern beside the stall. He didn't let it burn completely, just enough to char the edges. "They're coming," she asked. "Not yet," he said, "but they want to talk." June blinked. "Men like them don't talk." "No," Ezra said, "but they're scared enough to pretend." He told her what the letter said, that someone higher up in the outfit had taken offense to Wade, acting without full approval, that the drifter's death had complicated matters, that a meeting was requested on neutral ground. "They'll try to kill you," June said. "Maybe. Then we don't go." Ezra looked at her. "If I don't, they come here with more than just one drifter and a bottle of borrowed rage. They'll come with fire, and your children deserve to grow up without seeing more fire." She crossed the barn, stood before him. "I won't lose another home," she said. He met her eyes. "You won't." She pressed a bundle into his chest, a folded shirt, a knife, and a small silver cross on a leather cord. Ezra stared at it. "You sure?" "It's not mine," she said. "It was Thomas's, but he never believed in what it meant." "You do?" Ezra didn't speak. He just held it. The next morning he rode out again, this time toward Cold Hollow Ridge, where the meeting was to take place. June watched from the porch, the children behind her, neither of them asking questions this time. She didn't cry. She didn't call after him. But the set of her shoulders said everything. Cold Hollow was as dead as its name. Once a churchyard, long since burned down, now just a clearing marked by stone slabs and twisted iron fence posts. Ezra arrived at high noon. 3 men waited. None of them were Wade. The tallest stepped forward, clean-shaven, dressed too fine for dirt work. "You Langley?" Ezra nodded. "You bring her?" "No." The man smirked. "Smart." He gestured toward the other 2. "My boys. We came in peace." Ezra's eyes flicked to the rifles at their sides. "Could have fooled me." The tall man sighed. "This ain't personal, Langley. She's a debt. Wade got hot-headed. Shouldn't have sent him. He's being dealt with. We just want what's owed. That land. The cattle Thomas left behind. The notes say she was holding back what wasn't hers." Ezra's jaw clenched. "It wasn't hers because she's a woman or because no man wanted to see her fight for it? Doesn't matter. You give her up, and we walk away." Ezra didn't blink. "That's not happening." The man sighed again, deeper this time. "I tried," he said, and turned to his boys. The first drew fast, but Ezra was faster. The shot took him through the shoulder. He dropped with a scream. The second dove. But Ezra spun behind the iron gate, firing again. The tall man went for his pistol, but as Ezra moved, the silver cross June had given him swung loose from his coat. In that moment, Ezra saw a flicker of hesitation in the man's eyes. He flinched, not from fear, but from something deeper, something forgotten. Ezra didn't kill him. He just stepped forward and drove the butt of his rifle into the side of the man's head. When it was over, 3 men lay in the dust, alive, breathing, bruised. Ezra knelt beside the tall one, pulled his coat open, and tucked the cloth sigil inside his breast pocket. "Try again," he said, "and you won't be walking away." Then he left. Didn't look back, didn't ride fast. Just steady, the way men do when they have seen the edge and come back to tell about it. Back at the ranch, June waited. She stood in the field this time, apron tied, arms crossed. When Ezra rode in, he didn't say anything. She saw the bruise on his knuckles, the dirt on his collar. She didn't ask if it was over. She knew it wasn't. But she stepped forward anyway and reached for his hand. He dismounted slow, handing her the silver cross. She didn't return it this time. She just held it tight in her palm and said, "You came back." He nodded. "I always will." The wind carried no smoke that morning. For the first time in weeks, the valley stretched quiet beneath a pale sky, the frost melting off fence rails and porch steps as the sun climbed gently over the ridge. Ezra Langley sat on the porch of his ranch house with a cup of black coffee gone lukewarm. His rifle leaned against the post, his boots untied. From where he sat, he could hear June humming to herself inside. The clatter of pans, the thump of Boone's little feet across the floorboards. Clara was brushing the mare in the paddock, speaking to the animal in soft words that only children and horses could understand. Peace had returned, but it didn't feel permanent. It felt borrowed. Behind him, June stepped into the doorway, her apron streaked with flour, her sleeves rolled up. "You haven't eaten," she said. "Too early," he replied. She stepped onto the porch and took the seat beside him, their knees nearly touching. She held a biscuit in her hand and broke it in two, handing him the larger half without looking at him. "Coffee's cold," he added. "Then stop nursing it." He smirked but said nothing. The biscuit was warm, soft in the middle, with just enough salt to remind him of home. Not the house he'd grown up in. God knew there'd been no comfort there. But the idea of home, what it should have been, what it was becoming now. June leaned back in her chair and stared at the horizon. "They'll wait," she said after a long pause. Ezra nodded. "They always do. And when they're sure we've let our guard down, they'll try again," she finished. She looked at him then, her eyes steady. "We can't keep living like this. I know you're not sleeping." "Neither are you," she smiled faintly. "Not when you're pacing like a caged wolf all night." Ezra exhaled and rubbed his jaw. "I thought when I put that man down, sent his friends back with broken ribs and bruised pride, they'd leave us be." "They might have," she said, "but they didn't account for the fact that pride doesn't heal." Ezra turned toward her, coffee forgotten. "What would you do, June, if you were me?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the silver cross. "You gave this back," she said, "but you still carry the weight of it." He looked at the symbol, tarnished and smudged, hanging between her fingers like a question. "I never was a man of the word," he murmured. "I've done too much." She shook her head. "You didn't kill for power. You didn't burn homes. You protected." Ezra ran a thumb along the grain of the porch rail. "I don't want Boone growing up learning how to hold a rifle before he learns how to read. Then we make sure he doesn't have to." That night they made a decision. It wasn't born of fear, but of resolve. Ezra called together 5 of the oldest ranchers in the valley, men who'd worked the land through hail and war, who'd buried wives and raised barns with their own hands. He met them in his barn, under the light of a single lantern. He told them everything. About Wade, about the debt, about the Riddle Creek outfit, and about the threats that still loomed like thunderclouds in the distance. One by one, they looked at each other and nodded. Then they brought out an old map. Salt Creek had no sheriff, not since the last one got himself caught up with gamblers and vanished overnight. But it had men of grit, men with scars, men who'd fought for things harder than money. Ezra pointed to the ridge west of his land. "They'll come from there. That's where Riddle Creek keeps their herd now." Old Man Toombs, who hadn't spoken in 10 minutes, cleared his throat. "You want us to ride on them?" Ezra shook his head. "I want them to know we're watching, that they're surrounded before they even step out of their bunkhouse." One of the ranchers frowned. "Sounds like war." June, who had been standing silently by the doorway, stepped into the light. "It's been a war for me for over a year," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm just asking you not to let it come to my children's door again." The men looked at her, at the strength carved into her face, and the last of their doubts melted away. Later, after the ranchers had left, Ezra found her by the corral, looking up at the stars. "If we don't make it," he started. She turned to him, her eyes not hard but not soft either, just sure. "If we don't make it," she trailed off, unable to finish. Ezra shook his head. "We will." He finally turned to her, their faces close in the hush of the night. "You asked me once if I cared too much," he said. "Truth is, I didn't care enough. Not before you. Not before Clara and Boone." She didn't reply. Instead, she leaned in, and her forehead touched his. And for a moment, there was no war, no blood, no past. Only breath, only stillness, and the promise of something neither of them had ever dared to name. Not yet, but soon. Sundown came quiet, too quiet, the kind of hush that doesn't belong in a place full of life. No bird song, no wind, just the still breath of land. waiting for a thing it doesn't want but can't avoid. Ezra stood at the edge of the front porch, rifle in hand, eyes on the eastern trail. He'd been standing there since the sky turned amber, since the Last Supper was eaten in silence, since Boone's whisper to Clara, "Will it hurt?" was met only with her small hand clutching his. Inside, June knelt in front of the children. Clara had her hair braided back, her boots tied tight. Boone sat with his kitten tucked beneath his shirt. June's hands trembled only once as she tucked a folded note into the pocket of Clara's coat. "If something happens to me," she whispered, "you give this to Ezra." Clara's eyes flicked toward the door, where the shadows of her mother's courage and her own rising fear hung like smoke. "You're coming back," she said. It wasn't a question. June kissed her forehead. "I will try." Boone looked up. "I don't want to stay inside." "I know," she whispered, pulling him close. "But I need you to be brave just for tonight, just till the bad men go away." Ezra called from the porch, his voice low. "They're here." June rose. She holstered Thomas's pistol at her side, then reached for the rifle Ezra had laid beside the doorway. She joined him on the porch, where the last of the light painted the trees golden red, like blood caught on fire. "They brought 12, Ezra said, scanning the line of riders. "Wade's there, and that one in the blue coat. He's their boss." June narrowed her eyes. "That's Mark Riddle." Ezra didn't blink. "You sure?" "I'm sure." Below, the horses came to a slow stop 20 yards from the front gate. The riders dismounted one by one. They didn't charge, didn't draw. Not yet. Mark Riddle stepped forward, his coat heavy with dust and arrogance. A man who believed the land owed him something just because his name was stitched into a deed somewhere. "Langley," he called, "we've come to talk." Ezra stepped down from the porch, June beside him, her coat catching the breeze like a flag she didn't intend to lower. "You sent a boy to die," Ezra said. Mark tilted his head. "He wasn't my boy, just a message. You didn't like it." "No," Ezra said. "I don't like bullies, especially ones that bring fire to a house with children inside." Mark looked past Ezra to the windows glowing with lantern light. "I see you're keeping her, building yourself a little family of liars." June stepped forward. "The only liars are the ones who say a woman has no right to what she's bled for." Mark turned to her slowly. "You think you earned that land? That mountain? You think Thomas didn't sign away half his worth to pay off gambling debts?" "I think he died," June said, "and you came to collect his ashes." Mark grinned. "He died owing me." Ezra's voice cut like a whip. "Then send me the bill, but don't come for her again." Mark raised a brow. "That an offer?" "It's a warning." Wade stepped forward now, his face less smug than before. One eye still darkened from Ezra's fist. "You think you can scare us?" he hissed. "With what? That cross she gave you? With your broken ranch and your half-dead cattle?" Ezra raised his rifle slowly, pointing it not at Wade, but at the sky. He fired once. The sound cracked the dusk, and from the ridges surrounding the property, 5 more rifles answered. The riders turned in shock. Men emerged from the tree line. Ranchers, neighbors, those who'd heard Ezra's call. Toombs, the Weber boys, even old Dutch Meyer, who hadn't left his homestead in years, now stood with a shotgun in hand and vengeance in his eyes. Ezra stepped forward. "You wanted a war," he said. "Here it is, but it won't be the one you thought. You came for a woman and her children. What you found was a town ready to bury your name in the dirt." Mark's grin faltered. June raised her voice. "This is your last chance," she said. "Turn around, walk away. We bury this here." Wade reached for his gun. Ezra fired again. The shot took Wade through the thigh. He dropped with a scream, writhing in the dust, clutching the wound. Chaos threatened to break, but it didn't, because Mark Riddle raised his hand. "Stop!" The other riders froze. He looked at Wade on the ground, then at Ezra, at June, at the line of armed men slowly emerging from every tree and shadow. He spat once, then turned back to his horse. "This ain't over," he said. June's voice stopped him cold. "Yes, it is." Mark mounted without another word and rode off, his men scrambling behind him, dragging the wounded Wade with them like a sack of meat. The sound of their retreat echoed across the field, hooves pounding, the last sound of cowardice fading into the trees. Ezra lowered his rifle. June exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Clara opened the front door and ran to her mother. Boone followed. Ezra knelt as they wrapped their arms around June, and Clara reached up, holding out the folded paper June had given her. "You don't need this anymore," the girl whispered. June took it, tears finally brimming in her eyes. "No," she said, "I don't." Later, they burned the letter in the hearth. June watched the flames curl around the paper that had once carried her last words. Words she no longer needed. Ezra sat across from her, the children asleep between them on the rug, the fire casting soft light across their faces. "You think it's really over?" she asked. Ezra nodded. "They won't come back. Not after tonight." She looked into the flames. "Then we start again." He reached across the space between them. She took his hand. Outside, the wind returned, but it carried no threat. Only the scent of pine, of horses, of earth settling after a storm. And inside, for the first time in either of their lives, was something whole. Not perfect, but real. Family. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption from the dusty trails of the Old West.